History is not just dates and names. It is power. It is addiction. It is the moment when morality collapses under profit. Welcome to Cinematic History Stories, where we don't summarize the past. We put you inside it. Here, we uncover the moments history books sanitize, the decisions made in quiet rooms that shattered civilizations, and the empires that called themselves civilized, while doing unspeakable things in the dark. Tonight's story is one of those moments. In the 19th century, the British Empire did not go to war for land, or religion, or defense. It went to war for drugs. This is the story of how the most powerful empire on earth became history's largest narco-cartel, and forced an entire civilization to pay for the poison that destroyed it. March 18, 1839, Canton, Qing, China. Dawn breaks over the Pearl River Delta in a pale gray wash, the air thick with salt and coal smoke. On the water, the tide pulls slowly past foreign ships anchored just beyond the reach of Chinese law. Sleek hulls, tall masts, cannon ports shuttered but ready. On shore, the city is already awake. Porters shoulder bales of silk. Clerks scratch figures into ledgers. Somewhere behind high walls, a man reads an imperial order and feels the weight of history settle onto his spine. Lin Zexu, imperial commissioner of the Great Qing, stands in a courtyard smelling faintly of ink and wet stone. He is 49 years old, a scholar poet with a reputation so clean that people call him Blue Sky Lin. In his hands is the emperor's mandate, sealed and absolute. It authorizes arrests, confiscations, destruction. It commands him to do what no one else has dared: end the foreign opium trade. Across the river, the foreign merchants watch Canton like men peering at a fortress they've already breached. They wear tailored coats in the heat, drink tea sweetened with sugar, and speak in the calm tones of men protected by distance. Distance from the attics, from the prisons, from the consequences. Their ships sit heavy in the water, floating warehouses stacked with chests stamped in neat black letters, EIC East India Company, the seal of the British state. If you were standing there, listening to the creak of rigging and the slap of water against hulls, you might think this was just another day in the machinery of global trade. But the decision that brought these ships here was not made on the docks of Canton. It was made decades earlier, in counting houses in London, in boardrooms paneled with dark wood, where men stared at columns of numbers and chose poison because the math demanded it. By the early 19th century, Britain ran on tea. Not metaphorically, literally. Tea-fueled factory shifts in Manchester soothed the nerves of clerks in London, and filled the coffers of the treasury through taxes that paid for warships and bureaucrats. There was only one problem. Tea came from China, and China did not want Britain. The Qing emperor had no interest in British wool, no need for British clocks, no curiosity about British machines. For tea, he demanded silver. And so silver flowed east in a steady hemorrhage, millions of ounces shipped out of Britain, never to return. By the 1830s, the imbalance was no longer theoretical. It threatened the pound. It threatened the Bank of England. It threatened the empire itself. The East India Company, half corporation, half government, searched for an answer. It found one in the poppy fields of Bengal. Opium had existed for centuries. What Britain built was different. In India, colonial administrators transformed narcotics into an industrial process. Farmers were compelled to rip out food crops and plant poppies. In Patna and Ghazipur, vast processing factories rose along the riverbanks, brick and timber halls where thousands of workers stood ankle-deep in black paste, stirring it in vats, standardizing potency, shaping it into uniform balls. Each cake was weighed, each stamped. This was not smuggling in the shadows. It was state production. The law, however, remained inconvenient. Opium was illegal in China. The penalty was death. So the empire wrapped itself in a fiction. The company would not sell opium in China. It would auction it in Calcutta. Private traders, men with fast ships and flexible consciences, would handle the rest. They anchored at Linton Island, just offshore, beyond Chinese jurisdiction. There, silver changed hands. Bribes greased local officials. Gangs ferried chests inland under cover of night. Addiction followed the river routes, seeped into cities, crept through villages. And the silver came back. The bleeding stopped. The ledgers balanced. By 1838, 40,000 chests a year were entering China. 5 million pounds of narcotic paste. The consequences were visible to anyone willing to look. Soldiers pawned muskets for pipes. Magistrates smoked through hearings. Silver drained from the countryside, prices rose, hunger spread. The state did not collapse all at once. It softened. It sagged. It began to rot. That rot is what Lin Zexu has been sent to cut out. He moves fast. Raids tear through the city. Dealers vanish into cells. Addicts are marched into rehabilitation camps and given a brutal choice: endure withdrawal or die. But Lin understands systems. He knows you don't end a plague by punishing the sick. You end it by destroying the supply. So he turns toward the foreign quarter, the 13 factories, where British merchants live behind walls, protected by flags and arrogance. Lin issues an ultimatum. Surrender the opium. Sign bonds swearing never to traffic again. The merchants stall. They always stall. Lin answers with pressure. Troops seal the streets. Barricades go up. Food deliveries stop. Wells are guarded. Drums and gongs pound through the night, sleep denied, nerves frayed. What had been a luxurious enclave becomes a cage. Inside, the British Superintendent of Trade, Captain Charles Elliot, calculates. He knows the opium is illegal. He knows the merchants are guilty. And he knows that if blood is spilled here, the consequences will be catastrophic. At last, he orders compliance. The chests are handed over, 20,000 of them. A mountain of poison. On the beach at Human, trenches are dug. Opium is smashed, mixed with lime and salt water, boiled into useless sludge, and flushed into the sea. It takes 23 days. As the pits steam, Lin sits in his tent and writes a letter to a queen he has never met. The trenches at Human still steam under the spring sun, the air sharp with lime and bitterness, as Lin Zexu dips his brush into ink and begins to write. He writes slowly, deliberately, choosing each character as if it were a brick in a bridge he hopes might reach across the world. The letter is addressed to Queen Victoria of Great Britain. Lin does not threaten. He does not curse. He appeals. He explains that opium is illegal in China because it destroys families, weakens soldiers, corrodes the state. He notes, carefully, that Britain itself forbids opium smoking within its own borders. And then he asks the question that cuts to the bone of the empire's self-image. If you do not permit this poison in your own land, by what logic do you send it to poison ours? It is one of the most morally lucid documents of the 19th century. And it will change nothing. The letter never reaches the Queen's hands. Somewhere between Canton and London, it disappears into the quiet machinery of empire, misfiled, ignored, or deliberately buried. In Whitehall, the destruction of the opium is not discussed as an act of sovereign law enforcement. It is discussed as theft. 20,000 chests. Millions of pounds sterling. Property destroyed. And property, in the logic of the British state, must be defended. When the news arrives in London, it does not provoke shame. It provokes outrage. The men most offended are not ministers or moralists, but merchants, men whose fortunes float on the tide between Bengal and Canton. Among them is William Jardine. Jardine is a former naval surgeon turned trader, sharp-eyed, iron-willed, and utterly convinced of his own righteousness. He understands Parliament. He understands power. And he understands that Britain's empire is not held together by sentiment, but by revenue. He begins to lobby. In private meetings with Foreign Secretary Lord Palmerston, Jardine spreads maps across polished tables. He points to China's coastline, its river mouths, its undefended ports. He speaks of insult, of the British flag humiliated by an Asiatic despot. He invokes free trade, the sacred doctrine of the age. He assures Palmerston that Chinese forces are obsolete, armed with matchlocks and courage but no modern science. A small, modern fleet, he promises, could force compliance in weeks. Palmerston listens. The Treasury listens. Britain is broke. Tea taxes pay for the Navy. The Navy protects the Empire. And now the government faces claims from merchants demanding compensation for destroyed opium, claims Captain Elliot has implicitly guaranteed in the Queen's name. The choice is stark. Accept the loss and acknowledge China's right to enforce its laws, or use force to make China pay for resisting a crime. In 1840, Britain chooses war. The fleet that sails east from India is not large by European standards, but it does not need to be. It is a floating embodiment of the Industrial Revolution. Steam power, explosive shells, precision drilling. At its head is a vessel that seems to belong to another century entirely. HMS Nemesis, an iron-hulled steam warship, shallow-drafted, paddle-driven, bristling with modern guns. It can sail against the wind. It can move up rivers. It can ignore tides. To the Chinese coastal defenders watching it approach, Nemesis does not look like a ship. It looks like a machine, a black, smoking omen. The Qing Navy consists of wooden junks, their cannon little changed since the Ming Dynasty. Their crews are brave, disciplined, and doomed. When the first engagements begin, the imbalance is horrifying. British shells explode on impact. Congreve rockets arc through the sky, screaming like demons, setting sails and flesh alight. Chinese cannonballs strike iron hulls and bounce away, harmless. Forts that have guarded harbors for centuries are silenced in hours. This is not combat as China understands it. It is annihilation. British strategy is brutally efficient. There will be no attempt to conquer the interior. Instead, they seize ports, choke trade, and capture the tax barges carrying grain north to Beijing. The message is unmistakable: surrender or starve. Reports filter back to London describing the scenes. Chinese soldiers standing their ground, firing until cut down by grapeshot. Cities bombarded not because they resist, but because they exist in the way of leverage. Even some British officers, men hardened by colonial warfare, record unease at the slaughter. But the fleet moves on. By 1842, British ships steam up the Yangtze River, the artery of the empire. Their guns now point at Nanjing, an ancient city whose fall would crack the psychological spine of the Qing state. The emperor, faced with famine, rebellion, and annihilation, yields. On August 29, 1842, Chinese officials board HMS Cornwallis. They sign the Treaty of Nanjing beneath the shadow of British guns. The terms are merciless. China will pay 21 million silver dollars in indemnities. 6 million of that sum is earmarked to compensate British merchants for the opium destroyed at Human. The victim is forced to pay for the poison. 5 ports are open to British trade, beyond Chinese legal jurisdiction. Tariffs are fixed to Britain's advantage. And one final concession is extracted: a rocky island off the southern coast, ceded to the British Crown in perpetuity. Hong Kong. At first, Palmerston dismisses it as useless. A barren rock. No value. But the smugglers know exactly what they've won. Hong Kong is a sanctuary, beyond Chinese reach, under British guns. A perfect hub for a business that thrives on immunity. The cartel now has a capital. And the opium does not stop. It accelerates. Hong Kong rises from the mist like a promise kept to criminals. What begins as a windswept island of fishermen and pirates becomes, almost overnight, a fortress of legality for an illegal trade. Warehouses line the harbor. Clipper ships dock under the Union Jack. Contracts are signed. Accounts are balanced. The opium flows again, faster, cheaper, and safer than before. In India, production expands without restraint. Bengal's poppy fields spread like a stain across the countryside. By the 1850s and 1860s, the scale defies comprehension. Thousands of tons of opium move west to east, year after year. The revenue underwrites the British Raj itself, its railways, its administrators, its soldiers. The empire congratulates itself on order and progress, never mentioning the drug that pays the bills. In China, the consequences deepen into catastrophe. Addiction ceases to be a social ill and becomes a national condition. Families sell land to feed habits. Silver drains from the economy, triggering inflation and hunger. Rebellions ignite in the countryside, fueled by despair and moral collapse. The Qing state, already wounded, bleeds from 1,000 cuts. The Opium War is followed by another. Then more treaties, more ports, more foreign soldiers marching through cities that once believed themselves eternal. The summer palace burns. Missionaries arrive with Bibles. Merchants arrive with contracts. Gunboats anchor wherever resistance flickers. This era will later be given a name in China, the century of humiliation. It is not a metaphor. It is memory. For generations, Chinese parents will tell their children how the world turned against them, not with curiosity or respect, but with addiction enforced at cannon point. This trauma does not fade. It hardens. It becomes doctrine. When modern Chinese leaders speak of sovereignty, of rejuvenation, of never again allowing foreign powers to dictate their fate, they are not speaking in abstractions. They are speaking to ghosts. And what of the men who built the cartel? William Jardine does not face a courtroom. He returns to Britain celebrated as a defender of national interests. He enters Parliament. His partner, James Matheson, becomes a baronet, a pillar of respectable society. Their firm, Jardine Matheson, does not disappear. It evolves. Shipping, insurance, real estate, finance. If you stand today in Hong Kong's financial district and look up at the glass and steel, you can still read the names carved into stone and balance sheets. Streets, buildings, institutions. The legacy of the opium trade is not hidden. It is normalized. There is a cruel irony in how the story ends. By the early 20th century, Britain finally moves to suppress the opium trade. Moral campaigns gain traction. Parliament passes reforms. The empire congratulates itself on enlightenment. But the trade does not end because of repentance. It ends because it is no longer necessary. The empire has found new engines of profit. The damage has already been done. Millions addicted. A civilization traumatized. A global distrust set in concrete. Queen Victoria will reign for 63 years, remembered in portraits as a symbol of dignity and virtue. But behind the silks and scepters lies another ledger, one written in silver drained from China, in poppy fields planted by force, in wars fought not for defense or survival, but to protect the profits of poison. The Opium Wars reveal a truth that history often prefers to forget. That the difference between a government and a criminal enterprise is not morality, but power. That free trade can become a weapon when backed by iron hulls and exploding shells. And that progress, more often than we admit, is financed by suffering pushed far from view. The ghosts of the opium dens have not vanished. They linger in the mistrust between East and West, in the suspicion that follows every treaty, every port, every promise. Once a nation has been forced to swallow poison at gunpoint, it does not easily believe in cures offered by the same hands. This is not just a story about Britain. It is a warning about empire, about money, about what happens when profit is allowed to outrank humanity. Because history is not just dates and names. It is addiction enforced by cannons. It is morality sacrificed on the altar of balance sheets. And it is the long, unbroken memory of those who were never allowed to forget. The Opium Wars remind us of an uncomfortable truth. Power decides what is legal. And history decides who gets forgiven. The British Empire called it free trade. China called it survival. And millions paid the price with their bodies, their families, and their future. The ghosts of this war still walk the modern world. In distrust, in geopolitics, in the silence between East and West. Because once a nation is forced to swallow poison at gunpoint, it never forgets the taste. This was Cinematic History Stories. If you want to understand the world as it truly was, and why it is the way it is today. Subscribe, and stay curious. History doesn't repeat itself, but it always remembers.